Let's return to a dear friend of the show, a guy we love having on, a guy we love to share the studio with, and, of course, we read him all the time. On Cleveland.com, he is Chris Fedor, and he is on the Weishart Right. We make it right. Call Kyle Wright hotline. Chris, how are you?
Hi, Chris.
I'm doing great, guys. How are you?
Good. How's your stomach? And please tell me you don't have a little bit of the stomach bug. What is going on with the Cavs and that story?
No, I mean, I've been sick for like 3 weeks, but it hasn't been any kind of stomach bug like that.
Well, I see
Still
you
fighting
playing
it.
through it no matter what.
Yeah, we haven't noticed it in your coverage.
You're a gamer, man.
Way to go.
I haven't seen one misspelling or anything.
I appreciate that. Thank God for AI these days.
Amen.
No, I mean, I don't think it's anything significant that's going through the Cavs that's going to prevent guys from playing. They've got a clean injury report. Nobody's on the injury report with an illness. They had a voluntary shoot-around the other day before Game 5 in Detroit, and it was relatively heavily attended, the same amount of people that usually attend it. They attended it, with the exception of one, which was Sam Merrill, which was the specific player that was reported on. But he played the other night, and he played well the other night, and he made some timely shots for the Cavs, and he did the things that he did. So I don't think it's anything that is too significant that is going to prevent any of these guys from being effective. And I don't think it's a number of players. I think it's a small sampling of players.
Okay.
Chris, before we turn to Game 6, some strange things happen in like the final 2:45 of Game 5. You know, 9-point lead disappeared. Pistons went 0 for 6. JB had one timeout, didn't use it because he was waiting for, late in the game in case, but he let the Cavs have a 9-0 run. Max Strus with another great defensive play to get a turnover, and the Cavs did some really, really big things. What was the biggest factor in that collapse by the Pistons or the great turnaround by the Cavs in your mind?
I think it was a microcosm of how this series has unfolded, and I think it's followed the trajectory of this series. I think the biggest thing that stood out to me is that early on in the series, the first two games that both came down to clutch time, the Cavs didn't look comfortable. They didn't look as comfortable as Detroit in those moments. They were still trying to figure some things out. Do we put the ball in the hands of James? Do we put the ball in the hands of Donovan? What kinds of sets do we want to run in those kinds of situations? And it's understandable that the Cavs didn't really have those answers because they were still a relatively new team, and they were still working through a lot of those things. Whereas the Pistons, they had been together all season long. They didn't make a dramatic change at the trade deadline, and they knew what they were going to run. They knew what sets to go to. They knew who they were going to be in those late game situations. Since the Cavs have figured that out, one, they figured it out within themselves, and two, they figured it out of what the Pistons want to do and how to make the Pistons uncomfortable in those situations. And you saw that they had nowhere to go. Once the Cavs decided to send two guys at Cade Cunningham, just like the Cavs did at the end of Game 3 in that home game where it was 104-104 in the final 2.5 minutes, and the Pistons had nothing going for them offensively, and Max Strus changed the game with his leaping interception. It's just the Cavs have understood that late in the game, we're going to send two guys at Cade Cunningham, and we're going to force everybody else on the Pistons to try and do something, either make a play or make a shot. And nobody has been able to do that since the first two games of the series. If you think back to the first two games of the series, it was all Cade all the time. And he controlled the final 5 minutes in a way that Donovan Mitchell, James Harden, Evan Mobley, and those guys didn't. So in those late game situations, the Cavs have grown more comfortable at both ends of the floor. And I think that's what you're seeing. When you're talking about a tightly contested series, it can come down to like that smallest margin. And the Cavs continue, as this series has progressed, the Cavs have continued to look more comfortable in those moments.
Chris, when you look at the box score and you see that Dean Wade didn't take a shot in the last game, what do you think?
It's fine. He doesn't have to. That's not his role.
Well, Jeff and I had the same conversation, but it was just, and I thought similar to that. I was like, who cares if he doesn't score? As long as they win, he ends up +2 on the night, and he had 6 boards. If he did his job, we win. That's all that matters. But it still does look a little awkward when you're like, man, the guy didn't even take a shot.
It's a lot of time to be out there without a shot, but he's not there for that in this series anyway.
No. I mean, that's not his responsibility. That's not his role. Look, if he's going to get open looks from three-point range, then he's got to take those. And he's got to take those with confidence, right? But he's not going to be a high-volume guy. He's not going to be a high-touch guy. He's not going to be a high-usage guy. And that's why he fits brilliantly in this starting lineup. Because you want Jared Allen and Evan Mobley and Donovan Mitchell and James Harden to get all these touches and be involved as much as they are on the offensive end of the floor. And you need a role player to fill in around those guys. And look, sometimes Dean's going to close games and sometimes he's not. Sometimes he's going to start games and sometimes he's not. But he is a role player. He has a specific role, and they need him to do that. Set screens on the offensive end of the floor. And he does that. Crash the glass on the offensive end of the floor. See if you can get second chance opportunities. If they're going to close out on you as a three-point shooter, take a couple of dribbles, see if you can cause the defense to collapse and keep the ball moving. Kenny Atkinson says it all the time. Dean's a connector. And I think you see evidence of that. And I think he's the kind of guy, guys, that, when you look at the final box score, you're rarely going to be impressed. You are. But he has an impact, and he has a tangible impact. And one of the most important things of the Cavs in this series is how do we neutralize Cade Cunningham? How do we make him uncomfortable? How do we wear him down by the end of the game? And Dean Wade starts that. Dean Wade is the start of all of that because he can lean on Cade because of his size, because of his length, because of his athleticism. And if you spin it forward into next playoff round against the New York Knicks, it's not going to be Dean scoring 10 points. It's not going to be Dean taking multiple shots. It's what do you do against Jalen Brunson? How uncomfortable do you make Jalen Brunson? And then if you make him uncomfortable, how uncomfortable are the Knicks now offensively? So I think if you're looking for some kind of certain numbers to measure the impact of Dean Wade, you're just not going to find them in a traditional box score. But his plus minus is incredible. The net rating with Dean Wade surrounded by the new core four is like 17 points per 100 possessions better. And his on-off rating, there are three guys now, over the course of two straight playoff series that are on the positive side of net rating differential. James Harden, Jared Allen, and Dean Wade. Like at some point, that's no longer a coincidence. At some point, that's no longer a happy accident. That Dean Wade is an impactful and effective player for the role that they're asking him to take on.
How does a team that has terrific superstar talent who can take over a game, Donovan, James, how do they balance that ability and skill with knowing that if you play a really good team game and get the big guys involved, you're probably going to be really tough to beat? You needed Donovan to have the 39-point second half to win that game, but you might not need that every game. How does that get balanced?
I think you saw it in the final 3 minutes of Game 5, right? There was a moment where James Harden was driving to the right-hand side, and he was being guarded initially by Dennis Jenkins, and Tobias Harris was the one who was guarding Evan Mobley. So Evan Mobley set the screen up high for James Harden. James Harden attracted two defenders, stopped, surveyed the floor quickly, made the right play, kicked it to Evan Mobley, who buried a clutch three-pointer. That's the evidence of it, right? It doesn't always have to be James score 30. It doesn't always have to be Donovan score 30. They're going to initiate a lot of the offense. They're going to command a lot of the attention. And then it's up to the guys in their situation, whoever it may be, Jared Allen, Dean Wade, Evan Mobley, Max Strus, whoever it may be, to play advantage basketball and make the right decisions, make the right plays, and knock down the open shots when they present themselves. And then there was another moment in overtime, the first basket that the Cavs scored in overtime. James Harden drew two defenders, passed the ball to Evan Mobley. Evan Mobley's around the free throw line in a 4-on-3 situation, he had an opportunity to pass. He decided to take a little bit of a floater, but Jared Allen was right in position in the dunker spot to go clean up the offensive rebound and get the putback dunk for the first points of overtime. Like that's the beauty of this offense, is that the amount of attention that sometimes James Harden and Donovan Mitchell command from an opposing defense allows the other guys that aren't as skilled offensively, that aren't as polished offensively, to play advantage basketball. And Evan Mobley has been doing that at a very, very high level, and I think Jared Allen has been doing that at a very, very high level as this series has progressed as well. So you see the vision, you see evidence of how it can all work together. And it sometimes it's going to be Evan Mobley handling the ball in these pick and roll situations because he has the advantage in those situations. And I think it's just reading the game, reading the matchups, reading the flow, and what's needed at that particular time. And I think that's the beauty of having such a veteran maestro in James Harden and somebody like Donovan Mitchell, who is a selfless superstar, that they understand that they can have an impact on this team's success, even if it's not, scoring the basketball or having the primary assist. It's the attention that they command from the opposing defense and what that means for everybody else that's out there.
Chris, is momentum a real thing?
No.
I don't think it is either.
No. It was like one of the most ridiculous storylines that's coming off of Game 4. And every time, anybody brought it up, I couldn't help but roll my eyes. If momentum was a thing, would they have gotten down 15 in the first half of that game against, like, if they took all of this momentum by winning 2 straight games at home, would they have gone down 15 points in the first half against Detroit in Game 5? No. Like, it's not a thing. It doesn't carry over from game to game. It may at times, like, you may be fueled by it possession to possession, but it doesn't carry over quarter to quarter. It doesn't carry over half to half, and it doesn't carry over game to game, because in the playoffs, every single series, every single game takes on a new life. And it's about adjustments, it's about lineup changes, rotational changes, and things along those lines. But no, like the idea that the Cavs had all this momentum after back-to-back wins in Cleveland, that certainly didn't carry over into Detroit. And there's no guarantee that what the Cavs did late in the fourth quarter in overtime is going to carry over into Game 6 just because they're at home. They're going to have to execute the same way that they did down the stretch. They're going to have the same level of attention to detail and focus and tenacity and energy and intensity and stuff like that. So no, I think that's one of the most hilarious things that came out of Game 4, and I just had to shake my head at it because I don't believe that it's a real thing.
I'm with you on that. I think it's funny because we sit here and we go, momentum off the last game. I'm like, the last game's over, man. You can't do anything about it. And you better come out hot tonight because you don't want to give Detroit any kind of thought that they can win this thing and push it back to Detroit. I just look at it that way too. All right, do you believe the Cavaliers will win tonight? Or let me ask you the questions backwards. How can the Cavaliers win tonight? Start there.
I think they just have to continue to do a lot of the things that they've done as this series has progressed. And I think the number one thing that they can do is what they've done defensively. And it's, force the others around Cade Cunningham to have to make plays and have to make shots. Try and limit him. If you limit him, if you make him uncomfortable, if you force him into turnovers, then Detroit just doesn't have enough around him. Jalen Duren has become almost unplayable at stretches, right? Asar Thompson is an offensive liability, and the Cavs have guarded him as such as this series has gone on. So as long as the Cavs take care of the basketball, they continue to do the things offensively and defensively that they've done in the last couple of games, and they continue to have the same level of attention to detail and focus and enthusiasm and physicality. That's another thing that I feel like has kind of transpired as this series has gone on. The Cavs have a better understanding of the level of physicality that they need to get to because Detroit plays with that level of physicality on a possession-to-possession basis. But if you match that, the Cavs are going to have a talent edge, right? Mm-hmm. So, if you play with the same level of physicality and intensity as Detroit, you're going to have the talent edge. You're going to have the depth advantage. You're the more complete roster, and some of those things start to swing toward you. So as long as the Cavs do those kinds of things, and again, taking care of the basketball is so important against the Pistons because they're so limited, especially in half-court environments offensively. So if the Cavs do those kinds of things, I definitely think they can win. And I do expect them to win because I think they're the better, they're the deeper, they're the more complete team. And I think Detroit, while they have tried some things schematically and they've tried some things from a lineup and a rotational perspective, sometimes you get to a point in the series as the less talented team that you're like, well, we've exhausted all of our potential options to solve what it is you're doing. And I think Detroit has fewer options right now and fewer answers right now than the Cavs do.
Chris, as always, we appreciate your perspective. Great stuff. And we will be reading your stuff every day in Cleveland.com. Thank you.
Get healthy.
Yeah.
You got it, guys. Anytime. Appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, buddy.
We'll talk to you later. Chris Fedor, friend of the show.